he was talking about before in Matthew 25 specifically, Jesus, whether you agree with the words or not, I'd be curious about what you have to say about it, but Jesus specifically talks about the day of judgment and talks about how certain people who
I believe that this has gone on for thousands of years, this discussion, and I believe it's arrogant to believe that we have an understanding at this point.
Okay.
And so this discussion, coming together to discuss this, is what I think is more important than getting people to blindly adhere to a dogma of any religion.
So how do you know which parts of the dogma
you don't,
to believe?
because we're human. We're going to find out.
Okay.
And that's the mystery of life, and that's what makes life so great.
Okay. So, but do you see, though, when you start saying we don't really know which parts to believe, then it's almost kind of nonsensical, the statement that you made about how I believe, like, the Old Testament.
No. I believe in all of it. You said the interpretation, and then that's where it gets to be a great area, because by definition, an interpretation is your view on a fact or a set of circumstances. So I agree on the validity of the Bible. What I don't agree is on everybody's interpretation of it.
So then when Jesus says man will enter into outer darkness where there's the eternal flame, where the worm never dies, where the fire's never quenched, how do you interpret that? Like, where do you
I don't necessarily interpret that as a literal interpretation.
Okay.
You know, they refer to Gehenna, which is a fire pit outside of Jerusalem, which no longer exists.
Right.
He says you will go to Gehenna.
Right.
Well, if I'm going literal, well, shit, there's going to be one physical location called Gehenna where I'm going to?
Right.
I don't think so.
Right.
So you can agree that's not literal.
Right.
Yeah,
well, exactly. I think that was like he was pointing to earlier. That was an analogy to help people understand.
That's what I'm saying. So where do you draw what's literal and what's analogy?
Right.
That's
well, you know, an interesting piece about that is that when we see symbolism in the Bible, I think almost without fail, it's always more so than what the symbolism is actually portraying. So when we see symbolism like Jesus pointing to Gehenna, it's not going to be something less than what he's saying. It's actually going to be something more.
Well, it's a physical reference to something you can't understand. I get that.
Right.